The thunder cracked across the vast Wyoming sky as Willa Grayson stumbled through the driving rain, her sodden skirts weighing her down like anchors. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life out west had turned into a nightmare of betrayal and abandonment. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed forward, one trembling foot in front of the other, the distant light of a lonely cabin her only beacon in the gathering darkness. Willa had left Philadelphia with dreams and a husband. Now she had neither. Thomas had taken their wagon, their supplies, their money, everything but the clothes on her back and the wedding ring she'd torn from her finger and thrown at his retreating form. 3 days she'd walked, with little food and even less rest. The fever that had started as a mild discomfort was now a raging inferno beneath her skin. The rain's slicked ground betrayed her faltering steps. Willa collapsed to her knees in the mud, her vision swimming with black spots. She was going to die here, alone and forgotten. No one would ever know what had become of Willa Grayson, once the pride of her father's household. The thought brought a sob to her lips, carried away by the howling wind, but something within her refused to surrender. With trembling arms, she pushed herself up once more, fixing her gaze on that distant light. One more step. Just one more. By the time she reached the wooden porch, her legs were shaking so badly she could hardly stand. Willa raised a fist to knock, but her strength finally failed her. She crumpled against the door with a soft thud, consciousness slipping away like water through her fingers. Inside the cabin, Nathan Sutter looked up from his book, startled by the sound. Years of living on the frontier had honed his instincts to razor sharpness. He set aside his coffee, drew his Colt revolver from its holster hanging on a nearby chair, and moved silently to the door. "Who's there?" he called, voice hard as the mountains that surrounded his homestead. When no answer came, he carefully eased the door open, gun at the ready. What he found instead of danger was a half-drowned woman collapsing into his arms. "Good Lord," he breathed, holstering his weapon and scooping her up. She weighed almost nothing, soaked to the bone and burning with fever. Nathan kicked the door shut behind him and carried her to the buffalo hide rug before his hearth. The woman's face was pale as milk, framed by dark hair plastered to her skull. Her lips held a bluish tint that worried him deeply. He'd seen men die of exposure in these mountains, and this woman was teetering on that same precipice. Nathan worked quickly, stoking the fire higher before gathering blankets from his bed. The proper thing would be to leave her in her wet clothes, but propriety wouldn't keep her alive. With gentle efficiency, he removed her outer garments, leaving her in her sodden chemise and drawers, and wrapped her in the thick wool blankets. "Stay with me, miss," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. He placed another log on the fire and set a kettle of water to boil. Years of surviving alone had taught him a thing or two about treating illness. The willow bark tea would help with the fever if she lived long enough to drink it. For hours, Nathan sat beside her, periodically dabbing her forehead with a cool cloth and coaxing small sips of water between her cracked lips. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling incoherently about someone named Thomas and broken promises. By dawn, her fever had risen so high Nathan feared the worst. He'd lost his mother to fever years ago, and the memory of that helplessness twisted in his gut like a knife. This time, he wouldn't stand by and watch. He mixed a stronger medicine, adding herbs he'd learned about from an old Shoshone woman who'd once saved his life after a grisly attack. The brew smelled bitter and strong, but it was the best chance the mysterious woman had. "Come on now," he coaxed, lifting her head slightly. "You need to drink this. I know it tastes like horse liniment, but it'll help." Her eyelids fluttered, revealing fever-glazed eyes the color of summer sage. For a moment, she seemed to see him, truly see him. "Are you an angel?" she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. Despite the gravity of the situation, Nathan's mouth quirked upward. "No, madam, just a cowboy who'd prefer not to have a dead woman on his floor." A ghost of a smile touched her lips before her eyes slipped closed again. She drank the medicine without further protest, then fell into a deeper sleep. For 3 days, Nathan barely left her side. He abandoned his usual chores, leaving his small herd of cattle to fend for themselves in the nearby pasture. His only concessions to his own needs were brief trips to check on his animals and even briefer moments of sleep, caught in snatches while sitting in his chair by the fire. On the evening of the third day, her fever finally broke. Nathan had been dozing in his chair when a small noise woke him. He opened his eyes to find her watching him, her gaze clear for the first time since she'd arrived. "You're still here," she said softly. "It's my cabin," he replied with a slight smile. "Where else would I be?" She attempted to sit up, then fell back with a groan. "I'm so weak," she murmured, frustration evident in her voice. "That's to be expected. You've been fighting a powerful fever for days." Nathan moved to the pot hanging over the fire. "I've got some broth here. Think you can manage a bit? You need your strength." She nodded, and he helped her into a sitting position, propped against his rolled saddle blanket. Her hands trembled too much to hold the cup, so he held it for her, allowing her small sips. "I'm Willa," she offered after a few moments. "Willa Grayson, Nathan Sutter." He set the cup aside when she'd had enough. "Don't suppose you want to tell me how you ended up half dead on my doorstep?" A shadow crossed her face. "It's a long story." "Well, Miss Grayson, you're not going anywhere for a while. We've got nothing but time." Willa hesitated, then slowly began to explain. She'd married Thomas Blackwell in Philadelphia, seduced by his tales of fortune and opportunity in Wyoming territory. He'd convinced her to sell her inheritance from her grandmother, a substantial sum to finance their journey and purchase land. But 3 days ago, she'd woken to find him gone, along with all their money and supplies. He'd left her nothing but a hastily scrawled note saying he'd never intended to settle down and thanking her for financing his journey to California. Nathan's jaw tightened as she spoke. He'd known men like Thomas Blackwell, smooth-talking city slickers who saw the West as nothing but a place to make a quick fortune or escape their past. They were worse than the outlaws, in his estimation. At least bandits were honest about their intentions. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said when she'd finished. "But you're safe now. You can stay here until you're well enough to decide what you want to do next." Gratitude shone in her eyes, along with something that looked suspiciously like tears. "I have no way to repay you." "Wasn't asking for payment." Nathan stood and moved to the stove. "Now, you think you can manage some real food? I make a passable stew." Over the next few days, Willa's strength gradually returned. She progressed from broth to stew, and from sitting up to taking short, shuffling walks around the cabin with Nathan's supportive arm around her waist. Each small victory felt monumental after coming so close to death. Nathan, she discovered, was a man of few words but constant action. He never mentioned the imposition of her presence, instead simply incorporating her care into his daily routine. In the mornings, he would cook breakfast before heading out to tend his small ranch. He'd return midday to check on her and prepare lunch, then head back out until evening when he'd cook supper and sit by the fire, often cleaning his tack or carving small wooden figures with his pocket knife. On the 5th day, Willa insisted on helping prepare supper. Her legs still trembled with the effort of standing, but she refused to remain idle any longer. "You don't have to do that," Nathan protested when he found her shakily peeling potatoes at the table. "I know," she replied, not looking up from her task, "but I want to." "I've never been one for sitting idle." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but you sit while you work. No sense pushing yourself into a relapse." They worked in companionable silence, Willa peeling vegetables while Nathan prepared venison he'd hunted the day before. The domestic scene felt strangely comfortable, as if they'd been sharing this kitchen for years instead of days. "Were you always a rancher?" Willa asked, breaking the silence. Nathan shook his head. "Grew up in Missouri. My pa had a small farm. After the war, I headed west. Rode with cattle drives for a few years before deciding I wanted my own spread." He gestured around the modest cabin. "It's not much, but it's mine." "I think it's wonderful," Willa said sincerely. "You've built something real here." A hint of color touched Nathan's weathered cheeks. "What about you? What did you do before?" "Before I foolishly followed a charming liar across the country." Her laugh held no humor. I was a teacher. My father died when I was 16, leaving us with little money. I took a position at a girls' school to support myself and my mother. After she passed last year, I had nothing tying me to Philadelphia, she sighed. Thomas made the West sound so full of promise, a place where we could build something together. The West is full of promise, Nathan said quietly, just not the kind men like Thomas Blackwell understand. It's not about quick riches, it's about working hard and building something that lasts. Willa glanced up, struck by the quiet passion in his voice. In that moment, she saw Nathan Sutter clearly a man who lived by a code as solid as the mountains surrounding them. I think I'm beginning to understand that, she replied softly. As the days passed, Willa's strength continued to improve, though she still tired easily. She began taking on more responsibilities around the cabin, insisting it was the least she could do. Nathan protested at first, but soon recognized her need to contribute, to feel useful rather than helpless. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, Nathan returned to find the cabin filled with the aroma of baking bread. Willa stood at the table, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth, flour dusting her borrowed shirt, one of Nathan's that she'd taken to wearing over her chemise since her dress was beyond salvaging. "You've been busy," he observed, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "I found flour in your stores and thought you might appreciate fresh bread. It's been ages since I baked." She looked up with a smile that transformed her face, bringing color to her once pale cheeks. "I hope you don't mind. I haven't had fresh bread since the last time I made it to town." Nathan approached the table, inhaling deeply. "Smells like heaven. It'll be ready soon. I also made a stew with those rabbits you brought yesterday." Nathan felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest as he watched her move about his kitchen with growing confidence. His cabin had always been a shelter, a place to eat and sleep between work. But lately it had begun to feel like something more, like a home. The thought unsettled him. Willa would leave eventually. She was educated, refined, a city woman at heart. Once fully recovered, she'd likely head back east, or perhaps to one of the larger settlements in the territory where she could find work as a teacher. The life he offered was solitary and demanding, with comforts few and far between. "Something wrong?" Willa asked, noticing his expression. Nathan shook his head. "Just thinking about tomorrow's work. Need to mend that fence in the north pasture before the cattle find the break." If she doubted his answer, she didn't press. Instead, she gestured to the wash basin. "Supper will be ready soon. You have time to wash up." That night, they ate the best meal Nathan had tasted in years. The bread was perfect, with a golden crust and soft center that melted in his mouth. The stew was seasoned just right, the rabbit tender and flavorful. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, reaching for a second helping. "My mother," Willa replied, pleased by his appreciation. She believed every woman should know how to run a proper household, regardless of her station. Her expression grew wistful. She would have been horrified to see me now, wearing men's clothing and living unchaperoned with a bachelor. Nathan chuckled. Doubt she'd have preferred the alternative. "No," Willa agreed with a small smile. "I suppose not." After supper, they sat by the fire as had become their custom. Usually, Nathan would work on small tasks while Willa read from one of the few books he owned. Tonight, however, she seemed restless, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. "I need to decide what to do next," she finally said, staring into the flames. "I can't impose on your kindness forever." Nathan set aside the bridle he'd been repairing. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "That's very generous, but we both know it isn't practical." She turned to face him. "I have no money, no belongings beyond what I'm wearing. I need to find work, rebuild my life somehow. The nearest town is Silver Creek, about 20 miles south. Not much to it, general store, saloon, small church. Doubt they need a teacher." He hesitated. "Laramie's bigger, might have opportunities there." Willa nodded thoughtfully. "I could work as a seamstress if necessary, or perhaps as a housekeeper for a respectable family." She sighed. "I just need a way to get there and somewhere to stay until I find employment." Nathan's jaw tightened at the thought of Willa working as a servant, or worse, finding herself in circumstances even more desperate. Women alone in frontier towns often faced limited, sometimes degrading options. "There's no rush," he said more firmly. "Winter will be here before long. Travel gets difficult. You'd be better off waiting until spring." "I couldn't possibly. I'm not offering charity, Miss Grayson." The formality slipped out unconsciously, a defensive measure against the growing warmth he felt in her presence. "I could use the help around here. You can earn your keep until the weather breaks, then decide what you want to do." Willa studied him, her expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. "Are you certain? I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said simply. "And I mean it about needing help. Running this place alone isn't easy." She considered for a moment, then nodded. "All right, until spring then. But I insist on contributing fully, not just with cooking and cleaning, but with whatever work needs doing." Nathan raised an eyebrow. Ranch work is hard, even for those used to it. A spark of determination lit her eyes. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Sutter, and I learn quickly." He couldn't help but smile at her spirit. "I don't doubt it. And if we're going to be working together all winter, you might as well call me Nathan." "Only if you call me Willa," she countered, extending her hand formally. He took it, surprised by the strength in her delicate fingers. "Deal." True to her word, Willa proved to be a quick study and a hard worker. As her health fully returned, she insisted on learning every aspect of running the ranch. Nathan taught her to collect eggs from the small chicken coop, to milk the 2 dairy cows he kept, and to tend the vegetable garden that provided much of their food. The first time she successfully milked a cow without assistance, her triumphant smile was so radiant that Nathan found himself momentarily speechless. She looked different out here in the clean mountain air, her skin kissed by the sun, her movements becoming more confident each day. The fragile woman who'd collapsed on his doorstep was transforming before his eyes. October brought the first frost, painting the landscape in crystalline white each morning. The days grew shorter, the work more urgent as they prepared for the coming winter. Nathan showed Willa how to preserve vegetables, smoke meat, and store supplies where they would remain accessible even in deep snow. "Do the winters get very bad here?" she asked one evening as they stacked firewood along the eastern wall of the cabin. "Can be brutal," Nathan admitted, hefting another log onto the pile. "Snow gets deep enough to reach the windowsills sometimes. That's why we're stocking up now. Once the heavy snows come, we might be stuck here for weeks." Willa paused, a log in her hands. "Weeks without leaving the cabin." The thought of being confined in such close quarters with Nathan for so long sent a flutter through her stomach that she chose not to examine too closely. "It's not so bad," he assured her, misinterpreting her concern. "I've got books, cards. We won't starve or freeze if we prepare properly." She nodded and resumed stacking. "Then we'd better make sure we're prepared." By November, the preparations were complete. The root cellar was filled with preserved vegetables, smoked meat hung from the rafters, and enough firewood was stacked to last through the coldest months. The first serious snowfall arrived in mid-November, blanketing the valley in white and transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Willa stood at the cabin's window, mesmerized by the silent beauty of it. "I've never seen anything like this," she breathed. In Philadelphia, the snow would turn gray almost immediately from the soot and traffic. Nathan joined her at the window. "It stays pretty out here, one of the reasons I chose this place." She glanced at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. In the months she'd been here, she'd grown accustomed to his presence, comfortable in their daily routine. But moments like this, quiet, intimate moments, still caught her off guard, stirring feelings she wasn't prepared to acknowledge. "It was a good choice," she said softly, turning back to the view. "It's like a painting." That night, the temperature plummeted. Willa woke in the darkness, shivering despite the extra blanket Nathan had given her. The fire had burned down to embers, casting only the faintest glow across the cabin. She could hear the wind howling outside, finding every crack and crevice in the cabin's walls. She debated getting up to stoke the fire, but the thought of leaving her blankets, inadequate as they were, seemed unbearable. Instead, she curled tighter, trying to conserve what little warmth she had. "Willa," Nathan's voice came from the darkness. He'd insisted on sleeping on a pallet near the door, giving her his bed. "Are you awake? Yes, she answered through chattering teeth. It's so cold. She heard him rise, followed by the sounds of him adding wood to the fire and stoking it to life. The renewed flames cast his silhouette in sharp relief, broad shoulders, strong profile, hair tousled from sleep. This cold snaps worse than I expected, he said, rubbing his hands together near the flames. Fire won't be enough tonight. He turned toward her. I've got some extra furs in the storage trunk, might help. Willa nodded gratefully, watching as he retrieved several thick pelts from a trunk near his pallet. He brought them to her, laying them carefully over her shivering form. Better, he asked, his voice gentle in the firelit darkness. Yes, thank you. But even as she spoke, another violent shiver racked her body. Nathan frowned, clearly concerned. Your lips are turning blue. I'll be fine, she insisted. The furs will help soon. He stood silent for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. Then he spoke, his voice carefully neutral. In weather like this, trappers and mountain men survive by sharing warmth. It's not. He hesitated. It's not improper. It's survival. Willa understood what he was suggesting. The proper Philadelphia lady she'd once been would have been scandalized. But that woman seemed very far away now, like a character from a book she'd once read. Here in this moment, she was simply cold, and Nathan was offering warmth. I trust you, she said quietly. He nodded once, then carefully slid beneath the furs beside her, keeping a respectful distance while still close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Even that small warmth was a blessed relief. Try to sleep, he murmured. It'll be warmer by morning. Willa closed her eyes, acutely aware of his presence beside her. Despite the propriety he was attempting to maintain, there was an undeniable intimacy to sharing this small space, to hearing his steady breathing in the darkness. Yet somehow, rather than feeling threatened or uncomfortable, she felt safe. Protected, as his warmth gradually seeped into her, the shivering subsided. She felt herself drifting toward sleep, more comfortable than she'd been since the cold snap began. Thank you, Nathan, she whispered, not sure if he was still awake. His voice came soft through the darkness. Get some sleep, Willa. When she woke the next morning, Nathan was already up, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. Neither mentioned their shared sleeping arrangement, but something had shifted between them, a new awareness that lingered in their glances and the careful way they moved around each other. The cold snap continued for 3 days. Each night, without discussion, Nathan would join Willa beneath the furs, maintaining a respectful distance that nevertheless seemed to shrink slightly with each passing night. By the third night, she woke to find herself nestled against his chest, his arm draped protectively around her waist. For a long moment, she remained perfectly still, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her ear. She should move away, restore the proper distance between them. But his warmth was so comforting, his presence so reassuring, that she couldn't bring herself to pull away. As if sensing her thoughts, Nathan's arm tightened slightly around her. You all right? He murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Yes, she whispered back. I'm sorry if I disturbed you. You didn't. His thumb traced a small, perhaps unconscious circle against her side. Been awake a while. Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks, realizing he'd been aware of their position. I should probably stay, he said softly, if you want to. The simple words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. This was no longer just about warmth or survival. This was a choice, an acknowledgement of something neither had been willing to name. Slowly, Willa tilted her head up to look at him. In the faint light from the banked fire, his expression was one of carefully restrained hope, as if he'd offered her something precious and was bracing himself for rejection. Instead, she lifted her hand to his face, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. Nathan went very still beneath her touch, his eyes never leaving hers. I want to, she whispered. He exhaled shakily, then lowered his head to press his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverential, as if he feared she might shatter beneath his touch. Willa responded with a tentative pressure of her own, her fingers sliding into his hair. When they parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. Been wanting to do that for a while now, he admitted. Why didn't you? She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palm where it rested on his chest. Didn't think you'd want me to." His voice held a vulnerability she'd never heard from him before. "You're educated, refined. I'm just a cowboy with dirt under his nails and more cattle than conversation." Willa shook her head, pulling back slightly to look at him properly. "Is that really how you see yourself? Nathan, you're the most honorable man I've ever known. You saved my life, gave me shelter, asked for nothing in return." She touched his face again. "Any woman would be fortunate to have your attention." His expression softened. "Don't much care about any woman, just you." The simple declaration stole her breath. "Nathan." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms drawing her closer against him. Willa melted into his embrace, all thoughts of propriety forgotten in the warmth of his touch. For so long, she'd been focused on survival, on rebuilding her life from the ashes of Thomas's betrayal. She hadn't allowed herself to consider that she might find not just safety but happiness here in this remote cabin with this quiet, steadfast man. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nathan traced her cheek with calloused fingers. "Sun will be up soon." Reality intruded like a cold draft. Morning would bring chores, responsibilities, the routine they'd established, but nothing would be the same now, not after this night. "We should probably get some sleep," she suggested, though sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. Nathan nodded, pressing one more gentle kiss to her forehead before settling back, keeping her cradled against him. "Morning will come soon enough." But as Willa drifted back to sleep in the circle of his arms, she couldn't help but think that morning couldn't come soon enough. For the first time in months, perhaps in her entire life, she was eager to see what the new day would bring. The weeks that followed were filled with a joy Willa had never expected to find. The cold snap broke, but their new closeness remained. Nathan became more openly affectionate, finding small excuses to touch her throughout the day, a hand at the small of her back as he passed, fingers brushing hers as he handed her tools, a quick kiss stolen while collecting eggs. December arrived with more snow and the quiet anticipation of Christmas. One morning, Nathan announced he needed to make a trip to Silver Creek for supplies before the next big storm. "I'll come with you," Willa offered immediately, eager for a change of scenery after weeks of seeing nothing but the cabin and surrounding ranch. Nathan hesitated. "It's a long ride in cold weather." "I'm much stronger now," she reminded him, "and I'd like to see the town, please." He couldn't resist her pleading look. "All right, we'll leave at first light tomorrow. Should be able to make it there and back in one day if we push it." They set out the next morning, bundled in layers of clothing and furs. Nathan had only one horse suitable for the journey, a sturdy gelding named Rusty, so they rode double, with Willa seated in front of Nathan, secure in the circle of his arms as he held the reins. The journey to Silver Creek was breathtakingly beautiful. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape, glittering like diamonds in the morning sun. Pine trees heavy with white powder lined their path, and distant mountains rose majestically against the clear blue sky. "It's magnificent," Willa breathed, tilting her head back against Nathan's shoulder to take it all in. "I never imagined such beauty existed." Nathan's arms tightened slightly around her. "That's why I stay, no matter how hard the work gets. Waking up to this makes it worthwhile." They reached Silver Creek by midday. The town was little more than a wide spot in the trail, a general store, saloon, small church, and a handful of other buildings strung along a single dirt street. But after months of seeing no one but Nathan, even this tiny settlement seemed bustling to Willa. Nathan helped her down from the horse, then secured Rusty to the hitching post outside the general store. "Won't take long to get what we need," he said, offering his arm to her. "Store first, then maybe we can get a hot meal at the saloon before heading back." The bell above the door jingled as they entered the store. A middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "Nathan Sutter, as I live and breathe, thought you might have frozen solid up in that cabin of yours." His curious gaze shifted to Willa. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Frank, this is Willa Grayson. Willa, Frank Mercer owns this establishment." Willa smiled politely. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Mercer." Frank's eyes darted between them, clearly bursting with curiosity but restrained by Western courtesy. Likewise, Miss Grayson, don't often see new faces around here, especially not in winter. Miss Grayson is staying at my ranch for the season, Nathan explained, his tone discouraging further questions. We need supplies, got a list here. While Nathan discussed the order with Frank, Willa wandered the store, marveling at the variety of goods crammed into the small space. Everything from tools to fabrics to candy was available, though at prices that reflected the difficulty of transporting goods to such a remote location. Her attention was caught by a display of fabric, not the practical homespun and calico that dominated, but a bolt of deep green wool, finer than anything else in the store. She ran her fingers over it longingly, thinking of her ruined dress and how long she'd been wearing Nathan's oversized shirts and trousers. That just came in last week, Frank said, noticing her interest. Finest merino wool would make a handsome dress for a lady. Willa reluctantly withdrew her hand. It's lovely, but I'm afraid it's not practical for ranch work. Nathan, who had been watching the exchange, stepped forward. How much for enough to make a dress? Nathan, no, Willa protested quietly. It's far too expensive. He ignored her, looking expectantly at Frank, who quoted a price that made Willa wince. Without hesitation, Nathan nodded. Add it to our order, and whatever else is needed, thread, buttons, whatever. Nathan, you can't, I can, he said firmly. Consider it a Christmas gift. Frank, hiding a smile, busied himself cutting the fabric and gathering notions. Willa stood speechless, touched beyond words by Nathan's generosity. When they left the store, their supplies loaded in saddlebags and wrapped packages, Nathan suggested they visit the saloon for a hot meal before the journey home. The establishment was relatively quiet at that hour, with only a few patrons nursing drinks at the bar. The owner, a broad-shouldered man with an impressive mustache, greeted Nathan warmly. Been a while, Sutter. Usual tables open. He led them to a small table in the corner, relatively private compared to the others. A serving girl brought them bowls of hearty stew and thick slices of bread, along with coffee for Nathan and tea for Willa, a luxury she hadn't tasted since leaving Philadelphia. As they ate, Willa became aware of curious glances from the other patrons. Clearly, Nathan was known here, but the presence of a woman with him was causing speculation. Everyone's staring, she murmured. Nathan shrugged. Not used to seeing me with company, especially not a woman. Don't mind them. Is it really so unusual, she asked, for you to have company? He met her eyes directly. Never brought anyone here before. The simple statement carried weight. Nathan was a private man, and by bringing her to town, he was making a public declaration of sorts. The realization warmed her more than the stew. They were nearly finished with their meal when the saloon door banged open, admitting a gust of cold air and a group of rough-looking men. The atmosphere in the room immediately tensed. Nathan straightened in his chair, his expression hardening as he observed the newcomers. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar cutting across one cheek, surveyed the room with cold eyes. When his gaze landed on their table, a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. Well, look who's in town, he drawled, sauntering toward them. Nathan Sutter, the man who thinks he's too good to sell his land. Nathan's voice was calm but carried an edge Willa had never heard before. Afternoon, Reeves. Don't recall inviting you to join us. Now that ain't friendly. Reeves pulled out a chair uninvited and straddled it, leaning his arms on the back. His eyes slid to Willa, lingering inappropriately. And who might this be? Finally bought yourself a woman, Sutter. Willa felt Nathan tense beside her, his hand closing into a fist on the table. Before he could respond, she spoke, her voice cool and composed. I believe Mr. Sutter asked you not to join us. Perhaps you could respect his wishes. Reeves looked momentarily taken aback by her refined accent and direct address, then let out a bark of laughter. Got yourself an educated one, did you? Fancy Eastern lady slumming with a cowboy. He leaned closer to Willa. When you tire of rough hands and a dirt floor, sweetheart, I've got a proper house in town. Nathan stood so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's enough, Reeves. Apologize to the lady and leave. The saloon had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on the confrontation. Reeves slowly rose to his feet, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "Or what, Sutter, you going to make me?" His gaze flicked to Willa again. "Don't seem like your type anyway." "Too refined. Bet she's counting the days till she can leave your miserable cabin and get back to civilization." Willa saw something dangerous flash in Nathan's eyes. Before the situation could escalate further, she stood and placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Nathan, he's not worth it." She turned to Reeves, her gaze steady. "Mr. Reeves, I assure you I have no interest in your house or your company. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were just leaving." She could feel Nathan's arm trembling with suppressed rage beneath her hand, but after a moment he nodded curtly. "We're done here." Reeves sneered but stepped back, allowing them to pass. As they moved toward the door, he called after them, "This ain't over, Sutter. That land will be mine one way or another." Outside, Nathan helped Willa mount Rusty, his movements brusque with lingering anger. They rode in silence for several minutes before Willa finally spoke. "Who was that man?" Nathan's voice was tight. "Garrett Reeves. Owns most of the businesses in Silver Creek and wants to own all the land too. Been trying to buy my ranch for years." "Why does he want it so badly?" "Water rights. My property controls access to the best water source in the valley. Without it, his plans for expansion are limited." Nathan's arms tightened around her waist. "I've refused every offer. That land's been bought and paid for with my sweat and blood. It's not for sale at any price." Willa leaned back against him. "He seemed dangerous. He is. Man's used to getting his way." There was a pause before Nathan added, "I'm sorry you had to witness that, and for what he said about you." "You have nothing to apologize for," she assured him. "Though I am curious about this proper house in town he mentioned." Nathan snorted. "It's the biggest house in Silver Creek, which isn't saying much. Reeves likes to put on airs, pretend he's some kind of Eastern gentleman instead of the cutthroat he really is." They rode in silence for a while longer, each lost in thought. Finally, Willa spoke again, her voice soft. "What he said? About me counting the days until I can leave. You know that's not true, don't you?" Nathan's response was delayed long enough that she twisted in the saddle to see his face. His expression was guarded. "Nathan, never expected you to stay forever," he said finally. "You had a life before, education, prospects. This was always temporary." The words stung, though she recognized the insecurity behind them. "Is that what you think? That I'm just waiting for spring to leave, aren't you?" His voice was carefully neutral. "We never talked about after." Willa turned as much as the saddle would allow, meeting his gaze directly. "I thought I'd made my feelings clear. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, Nathan." "The thought of leaving you?" She shook her head. "I don't want to go anywhere." The tension in his body eased, and something like wonder dawned in his eyes. "You'd stay, even with the hard work, the isolation, the rough living?" "I've discovered I quite like the work," she said with a smile. "As for isolation, I'm not isolated when I'm with you, and our living conditions seem less rough every day." Nathan reined Rusty to a halt, then carefully turned Willa in the saddle to face him fully. His expression was more open, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "I love you, Willa," he said simply. "Have for a while now. If you stay, it wouldn't be as my housekeeper or ranch hand, it would be as my wife." Willa's breath caught. Though their relationship had deepened over the weeks, neither had spoken of marriage. "Are you proposing, Nathan Sutter?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Not very romantically, I'm afraid. Middle of a trail, halfway home after nearly getting into a brawl at the saloon." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But yes, I'm asking you to marry me, to build a life with me on that land Reeves wants so badly." Joy bloomed in Willa's chest, warming her despite the winter chill. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Nathan's smile was brilliant as he leaned forward to kiss her, his lips warm and firm against hers. When they parted, both were breathless and grinning like fools. "We should get home before dark," Nathan said reluctantly. "Storm's coming." As they continued their journey, snowflakes began to fall, dancing in the air around them, but Willa felt only warmth, secure in Nathan's arms and in the future they would build together. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of happiness for Willa and Nathan. Their engagement remained private, with no one to tell but each other, which made it feel like a precious secret they carried between them. They planned to make it official when they visited Silver Creek again, perhaps after the worst of winter had passed. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a calm, clear sky that promised a cold night. Nathan had been mysteriously absent for parts of several days, disappearing into the barn for hours at a time. When Willa questioned him, he merely smiled and said he was working on a project. That evening, after they had enjoyed a special supper of roast venison with preserved vegetables, Nathan took Willa's hand and led her to his chair by the fire. "I have something for you," he said, uncharacteristically nervous. "It's not much, but—" From behind the chair, he produced a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate patterns of pine trees and mountains. He placed it in her hands, watching anxiously as she traced the carvings with her fingers. "Nathan, it's beautiful," she breathed. "Did you make this?" He nodded. "Open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a ring, a simple band of gold with a small, perfect pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," Nathan explained softly. "My father gave it to her when they married. I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for—" He swallowed. "Waiting for you, though I didn't know it then." Tears sprang to Willa's eyes as she lifted the ring. "It's perfect. I'll treasure it always." Nathan took the ring and slid it onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. Then he kissed her, a sweet, tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together. "Merry Christmas, Willa," he murmured against her lips. "Merry Christmas, Nathan." She had a gift for him as well, a warm scarf she had knitted in secret using yarn from his supplies, and a book of poetry she'd found among his few volumes and noticed was well worn from repeated reading. Small gifts, but given with all her heart. That night they slept in each other's arms, the pearl ring glinting in the firelight, a tangible symbol of the love that had grown between them during the long winter months. January brought the harshest weather, yet a blizzard that raged for 3 days, confining them to the cabin. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and finding every crack in the walls. Snow piled against the cabin until the lower windows were completely covered, creating an eerie, diffused light inside even at midday. Despite the ferocity of the storm outside, inside the cabin was a haven of warmth and contentment. They spent the days reading aloud to each other, playing cards and planning for the future. Nathan spoke of expanding the ranch, building a larger cabin with proper bedrooms for the children they both hoped for. Willa shared her dream of perhaps starting a small school once the area had more families, teaching the children of neighboring ranchers. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts taller than a man. It took Nathan most of the day to dig paths to the barn and other outbuildings, with Willa working alongside him, both bundled against the bitter cold. When they reached the chicken coop, they found it partially collapsed under the weight of the snow. Several chickens had perished, though most had huddled together and survived. As they worked to repair the damage, Nathan pointed to the mountains visible in the distance. "That's the worst of it," he said. "Storms like that usually mean the back of winter is broken. It'll still be cold, but we probably won't see another blizzard that bad this season." Willa brushed snow from her gloves. "How soon until spring, do you think?" "Late March, early April, before the worst of the snow melts. Why, getting cabin fever already?" His tone was teasing, but she caught the hint of uncertainty beneath it. She shook her head, smiling. "Not at all. I was thinking we could be married when spring comes. When the wildflowers start to bloom in the meadow." She'd seen that meadow only under snow, but Nathan had described the explosion of color that came with the spring thaw. Relief and joy spread across his face. "That sounds perfect." The following weeks settled into a rhythm of work and companionship. With the worst of winter behind them, they began more actively planning for spring, discussing which crops to plant, which repairs needed priority, how to expand the cattle herd. Each conversation reinforced their partnership, their shared vision for the future. February brought milder weather and longer days. The snow began to recede in places, revealing patches of earth that had been hidden for months. One morning, Nathan announced he needed to check the northern fence line, which hadn't been inspected since before the big storm. I'll come with you, Willa offered. She enjoyed these expeditions, which broke the monotony of cabin life and allowed her to see more of the beautiful land that would soon be her home in truth as well as spirit. They rode double on Rusty, following a path that wound through pine trees heavy with melting snow. Periodically, they would dismount so Nathan could examine sections of fence, repairing damage where necessary. By midday, they had reached the northern boundary of the property, marked by a small stream that ran clear and cold with snowmelt. They stopped to eat the lunch. Willa had packed bread, cheese, and dried venison sitting on sun-warmed rocks beside the stream. The day was unusually warm for February, with a gentle breeze that carried the faintest hint of the spring to come. "It's so peaceful here," Willa said, tilting her face to the sun. "I can see why you love this land so much." Nathan nodded, his gaze sweeping across the landscape. "My father never understood why I came west. He thought I was chasing some boyish adventure." He smiled slightly. "Took me a while to find this place, but the moment I saw it, I knew it was where I belonged." "And now it's where I belong too," Willa said softly. Nathan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Never thought I'd find someone who'd feel the same way about this place. Most women want town life, neighbors, society. I had all that in Philadelphia," she reminded him. "It didn't make me happy." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "We should head back soon, still have the western fence to check tomorrow." They had just mounted Rusty when the crack of a rifle shot shattered the peaceful afternoon. The bullet splintered bark from a tree mere inches from Nathan's head. "Get down," Nathan shouted, yanking Willa from the saddle and pulling her behind the shelter of a large boulder. Rusty, panicked by the gunfire, bolted into the trees. "What's happening?" Willa gasped, her heart pounding. "Someone's shooting at us." Nathan's expression was grim as he drew his revolver. "Stay down." Another shot rang out, striking the ground near their position. Nathan risked a quick glance over the boulder, then ducked back down. "See anything?" Willa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Movement in those trees across the stream. Can't tell how many." He checked his revolver, confirming it was fully loaded. "We need to get back to the cabin." "It's too exposed here. But Rusty's gone. We'll have to go on foot. Stay low, move quick, and stick to cover." Nathan's eyes were hard with determination and barely controlled anger. "Ready?" Willa nodded, though fear clenched her stomach. Nathan counted silently to 3, then they broke from the cover of the boulder, running in a crouch toward a stand of trees that would offer some protection. More shots followed them, kicking up dirt at their heels but missing their marks. Once in the trees, they paused only long enough to catch their breath before continuing south, moving from one patch of cover to the next. Occasionally, shots would ring out behind them, but the distance was increasing, the danger receding. After what seemed like hours of tense, careful movement, Nathan finally slowed their pace. "Think we've lost them," he said, breathing heavily, "but we still have a long walk home." The journey back to the cabin was arduous. The snow, soft in the afternoon sun, made walking difficult, and they had to remain vigilant for any sign of pursuit. By the time the cabin came into view, twilight was falling, and both were exhausted. To their relief, Rusty had found his way home and stood in the corral, still saddled but unharmed. Nathan secured the cabin while Willa tended to the horse, removing his tack and checking for injuries. Inside, they collapsed at the table, the day's events settling heavily upon them. "Who would want to shoot at us?" Willa asked, her hands still trembling slightly. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Reeves, the man from town. Why would he to scare us, to drive me off my land?" Nathan slammed his fist on the table. "Man's been trying to buy me out for years. When that didn't work, he tried intimidation. Now he's escalated to outright violence." Willa reached across the table to take his hand. "We should report this to the law." Silver Creek's too small for a sheriff. "Nearest law is the territorial marshal in Laramie, and he's got too much ground to cover to worry about one incident with no proof." Nathan's expression darkened. "Besides, Reeves has friends in high places. Doubt anything would come of it. So what do we do? Be more careful. Never go out unarmed. Watch our backs." He squeezed her hand. And I think we should move up the wedding. No sense waiting for spring now, Willa nodded slowly. We could go to Silver Creek next week, find the preacher. Too risky. Reeves practically owns that town, Nathan thought for a moment. There's a circuit judge due in Laramie next month. He can perform legal marriages. We could make the journey, be married properly. The plan was reasonable, but the uncertainty of their situation cast a shadow over what should have been a joyful discussion. That night, as they lay in bed, Willa could feel the tension in Nathan's body, the hyper-awareness of every sound outside the cabin. "We'll be all right," she whispered, nestling closer to him. "We're together, that's what matters." His arms tightened around her. "I won't let anything happen to you," he promised. "No matter what." The next morning, they awoke to an unexpected sound, a horse's whinny that wasn't Rusty's. Nathan was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle before moving cautiously to the window. "Single rider," he reported, his voice tense. Coming up the path slow. Willa joined him at the window, peering out at the approaching figure. The rider was bundled against the cold, face obscured by a scarf, but something about the posture seemed familiar. "Wait," she said, placing a hand on Nathan's arm. "I think I recognize him." As the rider drew closer, Nathan's stance relaxed slightly. "It's Frank Mercer from the general store." They met him at the door, both still wary despite recognizing their visitor. Frank dismounted stiffly, his face grave beneath his weather-beaten hat. "Sutter," he greeted with a nod. "Miss Grayson, sorry to ride out unannounced, but there's news you need to hear." They invited him in, offering coffee, which he accepted gratefully, warming his hands around the mug before speaking. "There was trouble in town yesterday," he began. "Reeves and his men rode in boasting about running you off your land, said they'd put the fear of God into you." Frank's expression darkened. "Then last night, Reeves got drunk and started talking too loud about how you'd be gone by spring one way or another." Nathan's face hardened. "Not surprising, they took shots at us yesterday near the North Creek," Frank nodded grimly. "That fits with what I heard, but there's more. Reeves has filed a claim on your water rights with the territorial office, says you abandoned the property." "That's ridiculous," Willa protested. "We've been here all winter. Reeves is claiming you left weeks ago, says he sent men to check after the blizzard and found the place deserted." Frank sighed. "It's all lies, of course, but he's got 3 men willing to swear to it. Without contrary evidence, the claim might stand." Nathan stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "So that's his game, drive us off, then claim abandonment." He turned to Frank. "How'd you hear about this?" Reeves's clerk does his correspondence. Young fellow, doesn't agree with his boss's methods. "Showed me the filing when Reeves was occupied elsewhere." Frank set down his coffee mug. "There's a hearing scheduled in Laramie next month, same time the circuit judge comes through. You'll need to be there to contest the claim." "We were already planning to go to Laramie," Willa said, glancing at Nathan. "For the wedding." Frank's weathered face creased in a smile. "Well now, that's some good news at least. Congratulations to you both." The smile faded quickly, but be careful, Reeves won't give up easily. He's invested too much in his plans for this valley. After Frank departed, promising to send word if he heard anything more, Nathan and Willa sat at the table discussing their options. "We need to document our continuous presence here," Nathan said. "Gather any evidence we can that we haven't abandoned the property." Willa nodded thoughtfully. "I've been keeping a journal all winter. It has dates, details of our daily activities, notes about the weather. Would that help?" "It might. Better than nothing anyway." Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "We should also get statements from anyone who knows we've been here, Frank, the saloon keeper, anyone who saw us in town." The next weeks passed in tense preparation. They worked to gather documentation of Nathan's ownership and continuous occupation of the ranch. Willa's journal became a legal document of sorts, carefully maintained with daily entries that could serve as evidence. They also prepared for their journey to Laramie, planning the safest route and what they would need for the trip. Despite the cloud hanging over them, there was also joy in preparing for their wedding. Willa worked on the green wool dress in the evenings, creating a simple but elegant gown that would serve as her wedding dress. Nathan surprised her with a small leather-bound book of poetry he'd ordered specially from Laramie through Frank Mercer, a wedding gift that brought tears to her eyes when he presented it. "How did you manage this?" she asked, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Asked Frank to get it last time he was here, had it delivered with the mail stage." Nathan looked pleased with her reaction. "Thought you might like something beautiful to read on winter evenings." "It's perfect," she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Thank you." March arrived with milder weather and the first signs of spring. Patches of grass emerged from melting snow, and the days grew noticeably longer. They set the date for their departure to Laramie 1 week hence, allowing them to arrive well before both the hearing and the circuit judge's scheduled visit. The night before they were to leave, Willa finished the last stitches on her dress and hung it carefully to remove any wrinkles. They packed their belongings, prepared food for the journey, and made final arrangements for the care of the livestock during their absence. As they lay in bed that night, too keyed up to sleep despite the early start awaiting them, Nathan pulled Willa close against him. "No matter what happens in Laramie," he said softly, "I want you to know these months with you have been the happiest of my life." Willa turned in his arms to face him, touched by the rare verbal expression of his feelings. "Mine too," she whispered. "And we'll have many more happy years together once this business with Reeves is behind us." "I believe that," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But just in case things go wrong, I want you to know I've made arrangements. There's money hidden under the floorboard beneath the bed enough to get you back east if needed." "Nathan, just listen," he insisted. "I don't expect the worst, but I want to be prepared for it. If anything happens to me, I need to know you'll be taken care of." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Willa said firmly. "We'll go to Laramie, present our case, get married, and come home to build our life together. I won't accept any other outcome." A smile touched his lips. "Have I told you how much I admire your determination, Miss Grayson, soon to be Mrs. Sutter," she corrected, returning his smile. "Soon," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. They departed at dawn, riding double on Rusty for the first leg of their journey. The plan was to reach the stagecoach stop at Junction Creek by nightfall, then take the stage to Laramie the following day. The weather was cooperative, cool but clear, with no sign of storms on the horizon. The day passed uneventfully as they rode through increasingly unfamiliar terrain. Nathan remained vigilant, his rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of trouble. But they encountered no one, not even other travelers on the infrequently used trail. By late afternoon, they began to look for a suitable place to make camp, as it had become clear they wouldn't reach Junction Creek before nightfall. Nathan selected a small clearing sheltered by pines, with a good view of the approaching trail and a small stream nearby for water. As they set up their simple camp, Willa couldn't help but think how far she had come from the sheltered Philadelphia teacher she'd once been. 6 months ago, she would have been terrified at the prospect of sleeping outdoors in the wilderness. Now she moved with confidence, helping Nathan gather firewood and prepare their evening meal with the ease of long practice. "What are you smiling about?" Nathan asked as he returned to the camp with an armful of kindling. "Just thinking about how much has changed," she replied, stirring the pot of beans warming over their small fire. "How much I've changed." Nathan set down the wood and knelt beside her, taking her hand, having second thoughts. "Not at all." She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I was thinking how grateful I am for everything, even Thomas's betrayal in a way. If he hadn't abandoned me, I never would have found you." "Remind me to thank him if we ever cross paths," Nathan said dryly, but his eyes were warm as they met hers. After a simple but satisfying supper, they settled beside the fire, Willa nestled against Nathan's side as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. The night was peaceful, with only the crackling of the fire and the occasional distant call of a night bird to break the silence. 2 more days to Laramie, Willa mused. "This time next week we'll be husband and wife." Nathan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Can hardly believe it myself." They spoke quietly of their plans, the ceremony, the brief stay in Laramie, the return journey to the ranch. Neither mentioned the hearing or the threat posed by Reeves, as if by unspoken agreement they would not allow it to overshadow this special time. Eventually, they retired to their bedroll, wrapped in blankets against the night chill. Sleep came easily after the long day's ride, and Willa drifted off feeling safe and content in Nathan's arms. She woke sometime in the deepest part of the night, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Nathan was no longer beside her, and the fire had burned down to embers, casting only the faintest glow across the clearing. "Nathan," she called softly, sitting up and peering into the darkness. No answer came. Concerned, Willa rose, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. The clearing was empty, but Rusty still stood tethered to a nearby tree, which somewhat eased her worry. Nathan wouldn't have gone far without the horse. She was about to call again when she heard voices low, angry, and unmistakably male coming from the direction of the stream. Moving as quietly as possible, Willa made her way toward the sound, stopping behind a large pine tree when the speakers came into view in the moonlight. Nathan stood with his back to a large boulder, hands raised slightly. Facing him were two men Willa recognized from Reeves's gang in Silver Creek. One held a revolver pointed steadily at Nathan's chest. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sutter," the armed man was saying. "Reeves just wants you gone. Take your woman and head back east where you belong." "This is my land, legally purchased and improved," Nathan replied, his voice calm despite the danger. "I'm not abandoning it because some land grabber wants the water rights." The second man spat on the ground. "You think you're the first stubborn fool Reeves has dealt with. There are a dozen ways to die out here that look like accidents: rockslide, fall from a horse, house fire in the night." Willa's blood ran cold at the thinly veiled threat. She glanced around desperately for a weapon, anything she could use to help Nathan. Her hand closed around a heavy branch that had fallen from one of the pines. "You won't get away with it," Nathan was saying. "People know about Reeves's threats. If anything happens to us, he'll be the first one suspected." The armed man laughed unpleasantly. "Who's going to investigate?" "Marshall's got a territory to cover and not enough men to do it. By the time anyone starts asking questions, Reeves will have your land and water rights all nice and legal." "And what about the woman?" the second man asked. "Shame to waste something that pretty." Nathan's expression darkened dangerously. "Touch her and I'll kill you. That's not a threat, it's a promise." The men exchanged glances, then the armed one shrugged. "Won't be your concern anyway. Reeves said to make sure you don't reach Laramie, didn't say anything about how to do it." He raised his revolver. "Nothing personal, Sutter." Willa didn't stop to think. With a cry of rage and fear, she burst from her hiding place and swung the branch with all her strength, striking the armed man across the back of the head. He stumbled forward, the gun discharging harmlessly into the ground. The distraction gave Nathan the opening he needed. He lunged at the second man, driving him backwards into a tree with enough force to momentarily stun him. "Run," Nathan shouted to Willa, grappling with the man he'd tackled. "Get to the horse," but Willa couldn't leave him. The man she'd struck was already recovering, turning toward her with murder in his eyes. She backed away, still clutching the branch as he advanced on her. "You'll pay for that, bitch," he snarled, reaching for her. Willa swung the branch again, but this time he was ready, catching it and wrenching it from her grasp. She stumbled backward, tripping over a rock and falling hard. The man loomed over her, his face twisted with rage. Suddenly, a shot rang out. The man froze, a look of surprise crossing his face before he crumpled to the ground beside her. Willa scrambled away from the body, looking up to see Nathan standing a few yards away, the fallen man's revolver in his hand. Behind him lay the second attacker, either unconscious or dead. Willa couldn't tell in the dim light. Nathan rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her entire body was trembling with reaction. "No, I'm fine." He checked the fallen men quickly. "This one's dead," he said, indicating the man he'd shot. "Other one's just knocked out, won't stay that way long." He turned to Willa, his expression grim. "We need to move, there might be others." They hurried back to their camp, quickly gathering their essentials and saddling Rusty. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving away from the clearing, following the trail by moonlight. "Where are we going?" Willa asked, her arms tight around Nathan's waist as Rusty picked his way carefully along the path. "Junction Creek is too obvious. Reeves's men will look for us there." Nathan guided the horse around a fallen tree. "There's another settlement about 10 miles east Miller's Crossing. Smaller, but they get the stage once a week. If we're lucky, it'll come through tomorrow." They rode through the night, pushing Rusty as much as they dared on the unfamiliar trail. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached Miller's Crossing, little more than a trading post. A few cabins, and a crude stagecoach stop consisting of a bench and a weather-beaten sign. The proprietor of the trading post, a grizzled older man named Miller himself, eyed them suspiciously when they arrived, taking in their disheveled appearance and obvious exhaustion. "Stage ain't due till tomorrow," he informed them when Nathan inquired. "You folks look like you could use some rest in the meantime." He offered them the use of a small room behind the trading post, usually reserved for travelers caught by bad weather. The space was barely large enough for a narrow cot and a washstand, but it offered privacy and, more importantly, a chance to rest. Once alone, Willa finally gave in to the emotions she'd been suppressing since the attack. She sank onto the cot, her whole body shaking as delayed shock set in. "They were going to kill you," she whispered, looking up at Nathan with wide, haunted eyes. "They were going to kill you and then take me." Nathan knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "But they didn't. You saved my life, Willa." His voice was gentle but firm. "And now we're safe. We'll get to Laramie, deal with Reeves legally, and put this behind us." She nodded, trying to draw strength from his certainty. "What if there are more men looking for us?" "There probably are," he admitted, "but they'll be watching the main routes, the regular stage stops. This place is off the beaten path, and once we're in Laramie, Reeves won't dare try anything so blatant. There's law there, real law." They spent the day resting, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. Miller brought them a simple meal around midday, asking no questions about their circumstances, but offering quiet assurance that the stage rarely ran late and should arrive by noon the following day. True to Miller's word, the stagecoach rattled into the tiny settlement shortly after 11 the next morning. The driver, a weathered man with a magnificent mustache, looked surprised to find passengers waiting at the isolated stop. "Bound for Laramie," Nathan explained, helping Willa into the coach. "How long's the journey?" "Day and a half, weather permitting," the driver replied, securing their few belongings. "Got one stop tonight at Fort Ridge, then straight on to Laramie tomorrow afternoon." The stagecoach was empty save for a single other passenger, a traveling salesman who introduced himself as Howard Jenkins. He seemed content to doze for most of the journey, occasionally waking to offer them peppermint candies from a seemingly endless supply in his coat pocket. The journey passed without incident, much to Willa's relief. They spent the night at Fort Ridge, a small military outpost where the stage horses were changed and passengers could obtain a meal and simple accommodations. By mid-afternoon the following day, they were approaching Laramie. Willa had never seen a frontier town of any significant size, and Laramie impressed her with its bustling activity and relatively orderly streets. Compared to Silver Creek, it seemed positively metropolitan, with multiple saloons, hotels, shops, and even a small opera house. The stage deposited them in front of the Laramie Hotel, a two-story building that, while modest by Eastern standards, was the height of luxury compared to Nathan's cabin. They secured 2 adjoining rooms. Propriety demanded separate accommodations until they were married, though both knew it was mostly for appearance's sake. Their first order of business was to locate the circuit judge and confirm the date of his court sessions. The hotel clerk directed them to the courthouse, where they learned Judge Harrison would begin hearing cases the following morning. "Land dispute hearings on the docket for day after tomorrow," the court clerk informed them after consulting his ledger. "Reeves versus Sutter, water rights claim. You'll want to be here by 9. "And marriages?" Willa inquired. "We heard the judge performs civil ceremonies. The clerk nodded, a smile creasing his weathered face. That he does. Usually in the late afternoon after court adjourns. I can add you to his list if you'd like. They arranged for their ceremony to take place the day after the hearing, hoping by then the matter with Reeves would be resolved favorably. After leaving the courthouse, they spent the remainder of the day purchasing necessary supplies for their return journey and enjoying the novelty of a proper restaurant meal, their first since the ill-fated visit to the Silver Creek Saloon. The following day, while waiting for their hearing, they attended court to observe Judge Harrison in action. Willa was impressed by the judge's demeanor, stern but fair, with little patience for obvious falsehoods or legal maneuvering. She felt cautiously optimistic about their chances. That night she found it difficult to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of the hearing and the wedding to follow. Around midnight she gave up trying and instead sat by the window, gazing out at the moonlit street below. A soft knock at the connecting door startled her. Willa. Nathan's voice was quiet. "Are you awake?" She opened the door to find him similarly unable to sleep, his hair tousled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Couldn't rest either?" she asked, stepping back to allow him into her room. He shook his head, moving to stand by the window where she'd been sitting. "Too much on my mind," Willa joined him, slipping her hand into his. "We've done everything we can to prepare. Judge Harrison seems fair. He'll see through Reeves's lies." "It's not just the hearing," Nathan admitted. "It's everything. The ranch, the wedding, our future." He turned to face her. "I keep thinking about what those men said at the camp, about accidents happening." "Nathan, no, let me finish." His expression was serious in the moonlight. "Even if we win tomorrow, Reeves won't stop. He wants that land too badly. As long as we're there, we'll be looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next attack." Fear clutched at Willa's heart. "What are you saying? That we should give up? Let him have the ranch?" "No," Nathan's voice was firm. "I'm saying we need to end this." "Permanently? How? We can't fight him with force. He has too many men, too many resources." Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering. "There might be another way, something I've been thinking about since we arrived in Laramie." He guided her to sit on the edge of the bed. "I did some asking around today. Turns out Reeves has enemies here too. People who have suffered from his schemes." Willa listened intently as Nathan outlined what he'd learned, that Reeves's ambitions extended far beyond Silver Creek. He'd been buying or intimidating his way into properties all along the territory's main water sources, creating a monopoly that would give him control over future development. "The territorial governor has been trying to stop this kind of land grabbing," Nathan explained. "There's even a special investigator in town right now looking into complaints against men like Reeves." Hope sparked in Willa's chest. "Have you spoken to this investigator?" "Not yet. Wanted to be sure of our facts first." Nathan squeezed her hand. "But I think we should. First thing tomorrow, before the hearing." They talked late into the night, refining their plan and gathering all the documentation they had brought with them. When Nathan finally returned to his own room, Willa felt more confident than she had in days. They weren't alone in this fight anymore. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. They rose early, dressed in their best clothes, and set out to locate the territorial investigator before the court sessions began. The hotel clerk directed them to a nondescript office near the courthouse, where they found a serious-looking man in his 40s who introduced himself as James Harker. "What can I do for you folks?" he asked, gesturing for them to take the seats opposite his desk. Nathan explained their situation, the legal purchase of his ranch, Reeves's attempts to buy or intimidate him off the land, the escalation to violence, and finally, the fraudulent abandonment claim. As he spoke, Willa provided documents supporting their account: the original deed, tax receipts, her detailed journal, and statements they'd obtained from Frank Mercer and others in Silver Creek, who could attest to their continuous occupation of the property. Harker listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarification, but otherwise allowing Nathan to tell their story without interruption. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You're not the first to bring complaints against Garrett Reeves," he said finally. Man's been on our radar for some time, but he's careful, covers his tracks, uses intermediaries for the dirty work. He picked up Willa's journal, flipping through the pages. This is the kind of documentation we've been lacking, establishes a clear pattern of harassment and intent. Will you help us? Willa asked. Harker nodded slowly. I believe I can. Your hearing is today at 9, Nathan confirmed. Perfect. Harker stood, gathering their documents. I'll be there. And I suggest you don't mention our conversation to anyone beforehand. Let's give Mr. Reeves the surprise of his life. They left Harker's office with lighter hearts, stopping at a small cafe for breakfast before making their way to the courthouse. As they approached the imposing building, Willa spotted a familiar figure on the steps. Garrett Reeves himself, surrounded by several men, including the one who had survived the attack at their camp. Nathan tensed beside her, his hand moving instinctively to where his revolver would normally be, though he'd left it in his hotel room, knowing weapons weren't permitted in the courthouse. Steady, she murmured, placing a restraining hand on his arm. Let the law handle this. Reeves noticed them as they drew closer, his face twisting into a contemptuous smile. Well, the hermit and his woman actually made it to town. Surprised you didn't have another accident on the trail. We've had enough accidents lately, Nathan replied evenly. Strange coincidence. Very strange, Reeves agreed, his eyes cold. This territory can be dangerous for those who don't understand its ways. Before Nathan could respond, the courthouse doors opened, and the clerk appeared to announce the start of proceedings. Reeves gave them one last smirk before turning to enter, his entourage following close behind. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators. A land dispute hearing might not be the most exciting case on the docket, but in a frontier town like Laramie, it passed for entertainment. Nathan and Willa took seats on one side of the aisle, while Reeves and his men occupied the other. Judge Harrison entered promptly at 9, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He called the court to order and proceeded through several minor cases before reaching theirs. Next case, Reeves versus Sutter, dispute over water rights based on abandonment claim, he announced, peering over his spectacles at the parties involved. Mr. Reeves, as the claimant, you may present your case first. Reeves approached the bench confidently, spinning a tale of discovering the Sutter property abandoned after the big blizzard in January. He presented his 3 witnesses, men from Silver Creek, who testified they had visited the property on his behalf and found it deserted, with no signs of recent occupation. The territorial statutes are clear, Your Honor, Reeves concluded smoothly. Abandoned property, especially that controlling essential water resources, reverts to territorial control. As an established landowner with adjoining property, I have filed first claim. Judge Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. He turned to Nathan. Mr. Sutter, you may present your defense. Nathan stood, his expression calm despite the blatant lies they had just heard. Your Honor, my fiancée and I have occupied the property continuously since she arrived last fall. We have never abandoned it, not even temporarily. He presented their evidence methodically, the deed showing his legal ownership, tax records proving his ongoing payments, Willa's detailed journal documenting their daily activities through the winter, and statements from Frank Mercer and others testifying to having seen them in town after the supposed abandonment. Furthermore, Nathan continued, Mr. Reeves has been attempting to force me off my land for years. When offers to purchase failed, he resorted to threats and ultimately violence. He described the encounter in Silver Creek and the attack at their camp, noting that one of Reeves's men present in the courtroom had participated in the latter. Reeves leapt to his feet. Objection. These are baseless accusations meant to distract from the simple fact that Sutter abandoned his claim. I'll determine what's relevant, Mr. Reeves, Judge Harrison said sharply. Mr. Sutter, do you have any witnesses to corroborate these allegations of threats and violence? I do, Your Honor. Nathan gestured to Willa, who took the stand and calmly recounted both incidents, her clear, educated voice lending credibility to her testimony. When she finished, Judge Harrison studied the documents before him, his expression giving nothing away. These are serious allegations on both sides. Before I rule, is there anyone else who wishes to address the court regarding this matter? James Harker rose from his seat at the back of the courtroom. I would, Your Honor. Reeves's head whipped around, his expression darkening as he recognized the territorial investigator. Harker approached the bench, introducing himself and his role. I've been investigating a pattern of land acquisition through dubious means across the territory. Mr. Reeves features prominently in that investigation. He presented additional documentation showing similar claims filed by Reeves against other property owners, creating a clear pattern of behavior. Moreover, Harker continued, I have statements from former associates of Mr. Reeves detailing his methods, which include intimidation, false claims, and occasionally violence when other means fail. The courtroom had grown deathly quiet, all eyes fixed on Harker as he methodically dismantled Reeves's reputation and business practices. When he finished, Reeves was visibly seething, his face flushed with anger. This is a conspiracy, he sputtered when the judge asked if he wished to respond. These people are trying to destroy me because they're jealous of my success. Judge Harrison regarded him coolly. I've heard enough. This court finds that the abandonment claim filed by Garrett Reeves is fraudulent and without merit. The water rights and associated property remain legally vested with Nathan Sutter. He banged his gavel decisively. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of Mr. Reeves's business practices to the territorial authorities for further investigation. Relief washed over Willa in a dizzying wave. They had won, the ranch was safe, but Reeves wasn't finished. As the judge prepared to move on to the next case, he surged to his feet. This isn't over, Sutter. You think a piece of paper will protect you out there? He jabbed a finger toward the wilderness beyond the town. Accidents happen all the time on the frontier. That sounded remarkably like a threat, Mr. Reeves, Judge Harrison observed, his voice like ice. Made in my courtroom, no less. Perhaps you'd like to reconsider your words. Before Reeves could respond, two deputy marshals stepped forward, flanking him. Harker moved to the judge's side, speaking quietly. After a brief consultation, Judge Harrison looked up. Garrett Reeves, based on the evidence presented today and the ongoing investigation, I am remanding you to custody pending further hearings on charges of fraud, intimidation, and conspiracy to commit violence. He nodded to the deputies. Remove him from my courtroom. Chaos erupted as Reeves fought against the deputies, shouting threats and accusations. His men started forward as if to intervene, only to find themselves facing several armed lawmen who had materialized from the crowd. Within minutes, Reeves was subdued and dragged from the courtroom, his protests fading down the corridor. Nathan and Willa sat in stunned silence as the spectacle unfolded. When order was finally restored, Judge Harrison called a brief recess and the courtroom began to empty. Harker approached them as they rose to leave. That went better than expected, he said with a tight smile. Reeves showed his true colors for all to see. What happens now? Nathan asked. He'll face charges here in Laramie. Between your evidence and what we've already gathered, he'll likely spend significant time in prison. Harker's expression grew serious. His organization will crumble without him at the helm. The men who work for him are opportunists, not true believers. Without Reeves to pay them, they'll scatter. So it's really over? Willa could hardly believe it could be so simple after months of fear. As over as anything gets out here, Harker replied honestly. Keep your eyes open for a while yet, but yes, the worst danger has passed. He shook both their hands. Congratulations on your victory, and I hear, on your upcoming marriage as well. After Harker departed, Nathan and Willa stepped outside the courthouse into the bright spring sunshine. For a moment, they simply stood there, allowing the reality of their victory to sink in. We won, Willa said softly, still half disbelieving. The ranch is safe. Nathan turned to her, taking both her hands in his. Our ranch, he corrected, our home. The simple words filled her heart with joy. Yes, she agreed, our home. The following day dawned clear and mild, perfect for a wedding. Willa dressed carefully in her green wool dress, arranging her hair with flowers purchased from a local vendor. She had no veil, no elaborate trousseau, none of the traditional trappings of an Eastern society wedding. Yet as she studied her reflection in the small mirror, she had never felt more beautiful or more certain of her path. A knock at her door announced the arrival of Mrs. Peterson, the hotel owner's wife, who had kindly offered to escort Willa to the courthouse and serve as a witness for the ceremony. "My dear, you look radiant," the older woman declared upon seeing her. "That color brings out your eyes beautifully." "Thank you," Willa replied, smoothing the skirt of her dress nervously. "I hope Nathan thinks so too." Mrs. Peterson patted her hand reassuringly. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon, my dear. He won't be disappointed." They made their way to the courthouse, where Judge Harrison had agreed to perform the ceremony in his chambers after the day's sessions. Nathan was already waiting, dressed in a new shirt and his best trousers, his usually unruly hair neatly combed. The look of awe on his face when he saw Willa was everything she could have hoped for. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. Judge Harrison led them through their vows with unexpected warmth for a man who spent his days adjudicating disputes and sentencing criminals. When they exchanged rings, Nathan had purchased a simple gold band to accompany her mother's pearl ring. Willa felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Harrison declared. "Mr. Sutter, you may kiss your bride." Nathan drew her into his arms, his kiss tender but possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. When they parted, both were smiling so widely it almost hurt. "Mrs. Sutter," Nathan said, testing the name with evident pleasure. "Mrs. Sutter," Willa repeated, loving the sound of it. "I think it suits me." They celebrated with a simple dinner at the hotel's restaurant, joined by Mrs. Peterson and her husband, James Harker, and a few others they had met during their time in Laramie. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding feast Willa might once have expected, but it was perfect in its way, full of genuine good wishes from people who had come to respect them. Later that night, alone in their now shared hotel room, Nathan took Willa in his arms once more. "Happy, Mrs. Sutter?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "And you?" "I have everything I never knew I wanted," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A wife, a home, a future worth fighting for." He tilted her face up to his. "Thank you for stumbling onto my porch that night. Thank you for taking me in," she whispered back. "For saving my life in more ways than one." His kiss was tender, a benediction and a promise. "We saved each other." They returned to the ranch 3 days later, traveling with a small convoy of freight wagons for added safety, though news of Reeves's arrest had spread quickly, and the threat he posed seemed to have dissipated like morning mist under the spring sun. As they crested the final rise and the cabin came into view, nestled in its valley with mountains rising behind it, Willa felt a surge of emotion. This modest homestead, which had once been her refuge in desperation, was now truly her home. The place where she and Nathan would build their life together, raise children, grow old side by side. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sutter," Nathan said, his arm tightening around her waist as they rode double on Rusty one last time. "It's good to be home," she replied, and meant it with all her heart. Epilogue 5 years later, Willa stood on the porch of the new cabin, much larger and sturdier than the original one-room structure, watching as Nathan taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his pony. The boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard, a sound that never failed to warm her heart. Inside, their daughter Elizabeth, named for Willa's mother, napped peacefully in her cradle. At just 6 months old, she was already showing signs of her father's determined nature and her mother's curiosity. The years had brought many changes to their lives and to the valley. Silver Creek had grown into a proper town, with a school where Willa taught 3 days a week when weather permitted. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, expanding to include more cattle and better facilities. The original cabin now served as a storehouse, replaced by the comfortable home Nathan had built with his own hands, fulfilling his promise of proper bedrooms for their children. Garrett Reeves was long gone, serving a sentence in the territorial prison. His empire had crumbled, his land divided and sold to settlers who, like Nathan, wanted to build something lasting rather than make a quick profit. As the lesson concluded, Nathan lifted James from the pony's back and set him on his shoulders, carrying him toward the house. The sight of them, her husband strong and confident, their son perched happily above filled Willa with contentment so deep it bordered on awe. How far she had come from that desperate night when, weak from fever and heartbreak, she had collapsed on a stranger's doorstep. How miraculous that moment of despair had led to this life of joy. Nathan reached the porch, swinging James down to stand beside him. "This young cowboy is ready for his supper," he announced, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Is that so?" Willa asked, smiling as James nodded emphatically. "Well then, we'd better feed him before he wastes away to nothing." As they moved inside together, Nathan's arms slipping naturally around her waist, Willa thought about the journey that had brought them here. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of her hopes had instead been the beginning of her true life. The weakness that had brought her to Nathan's door had allowed her to discover her own strength. Sometimes, she reflected, what appears to be our darkest moment is merely the prelude to our greatest happiness. All we need is the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time, toward the light.